Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, and welcome back to a Spring and a Spring Boot annotation series. So today we will discuss about add the red scope annotation. So basically in a Spring framework, scope annotation can be used to determine the scope of a bean. So scope of a bean means till where and till when the bean can be accessed. So the scope of a bean determines the life cycle and the visibility of a bean instances, and these are managed by the Spring IoC container. So basically there are like six type of scopes: singleton and the prototype, request, session, and the global session, and the application. So basically a singleton scope is the default scope, and it means that only one instance of a bean will be created for the entire Spring container, and this will be managed by the Spring IoC container, and this is the default scope. So it means that if you are not marking with @scope annotation, then by default Spring IoC container is going to take the scope as a singleton. So basically this is like suitable for the stateless and a stateful bean that can be safely shared. It means that a single instance will be created by the Spring IoC container, and like whenever you will ask for the another instance of that particular bean, then every time that single instance will be shared by the Spring IoC container, right? So now coming to the prototype scope, basically every time a new instance will be created whenever you will ask a Spring IoC container for that bean instance. So every time the Spring IoC container will create a new instance. So it is suitable for the stateful beans and when you want to control the life cycle of a bean explicitly, right? So to achieve this, we use @scope, and then there in the value we provide the name as a prototype, right? So by this we say Spring IoC container that we want the scope as a prototype. It means every time, every request, it will create a new instance for that particular bean, right? So the third scope is like request scope. So a new instance of a bean is created for each HTTP request. So this will be handled by the HTTP request. So every HTTP request, it will create a new instance of that particular bean, and this is suitable for the stateful beans. Yep, and like this is only valid for the web aware Spring applications, right? So next is like session bean. So this is like similar to the HTTP request, but in this new instance of a bean will be created for a HTTP session. So every time for each session a new instance of a bean will be created. So like request scope, this is applicable in like web applications. So the fifth is like a global session scope. So in this, like similar to the session scope, but use for the portlet web applications, right? So this is like similar to the session scope, but we use the global scope in mostly in the portlet based applications. So the sixth scope is application scope, and a single instance of a bean is created for each servlet context. So in this, every time a single instance will be created for a servlet context, right? So these are the six type of beans. So basically the last four type, that is request, session, global, and application, are only available for web aware applications, right? So now we are going to see how we can implement this or how we can achieve this scope in our Spring Boot application, right? So here you can see I have created already a Spring Boot application where I have discussed many like annotations like controller annotation, component annotation, and like lazy annotation, and the repository and the service annotation, and also the bean annotation. Yeah, so today we are seeing about scope annotation. So let me create quickly one package for the scope annotation. So in this scope annotation, let's create a Java class. Let's give a name as a singleton bean. So this is a Java class, and here let's create quickly the constructor of this singleton bean class, and let's define some SOP and here let's pass singleton. All right. So let mark this class as a component annotation with the component annotation so that we want to handle this bean by the Spring IoC container. So we have created one singleton bean class. So now let's create one more Java class inside scope package. Let's say the name will be prototype bean. All right. So let's quickly create the constructor of this prototype bean class, and here similarly I will put some SOP prototype, and let's mark this class with component annotation so that I want that Spring IoC container should handle the bean creation for this prototype class. Now I have created a singleton bean class and the prototype class for this. So yeah, so here I am going to show you about a singleton scope. So to achieve this, we can mark this with at the rate scope annotation, and then we need to provide the value, and in the value you can directly provide a singleton, or in the similar manner we have already like configurable bean factory, and in this we have the constant. So you can see the singleton constant which is showing the value as a singleton. So we can select this. Yeah, so we have put the value as a singleton for this scope. So yeah, so similarly type for the prototype, let use the scope annotation, and in the value let's provide configurable bean factory dot the prototype. So we will make this prototype bean class scope as a prototype. All right, so you can see this has a prototype, right? Yeah, so now we have to see how this works. So let's go to the main class, and here you can see already in the main method already I have a run method which is returning the context, and the context variable contained the bean object for every component class which is defined in a Spring, and this is handled by the Spring IoC container. So let me ask with the Spring context to get the bean. So for that we have a method get bean, and in this we need to pass the class name. So for getting the bean of a single turn bean class, we need to pass this class with a dot class. Let me import this class. Yeah, so let's store this to a singleton bean variable name. Okay, so let's mark this as a singleton bean1. So similarly I'm going to get this instance, this bean instance, like 3 times. Let's change the name of this variable to 3. Let's save this. All right, so here I am creating, means asking the Spring container to get the bean of this singleton bean class 3 times. But you remember that this has a scope as a singleton, and we have seen that for a singleton scope only a single instance will be created, and every time whenever we will ask further, then the Spring IoC container is going to share that instance to others every time, right? It means that it is not going to create the instance again and again. So let me show you. Okay, so let's run this, and here you can see in this constructor we have constructor which SOP singleton. Okay, so we have started our application, and let's see the output, and let's understand how this works. So here you can see that only one time constructor is executed for a singleton bean class. We ask with the Spring IoC container 3 times the bean, but every time it has uh, means means yeah, so like it has provided a single instance that has been created first time, because only a single time the constructor of this class is executed, right? So how to prove this? So we can prove this by checking the hash code, and we know that for every instance there will be different hash code, right? If instance is different, it means there will be a different hash code value for that instance. So I have created a 3 SOP, and that in that 3 SOP I am using the hash code method to get the hash code of these three instances. All right, let me save this and let's run this again. So by this we will see what values we are getting for these three instance variables, like single bean 1, singleton bean 2, and singleton bean 3. So here you will see that every time a same hash code value is returned, it means that these instances are not different. It is the single instance which are which are shared by the Spring IoC container every time, right? Yeah. So like this is all about a singleton scope. It means a single instance will be created, and that single instance will be shared every time by the Spring IoC container, right? Yeah. So like this is the proof that a singleton scope will create a single instance, and that will share every time, right? Now let's move and check about the prototype. So next scope we have defined inside our prototype bean class scope as a prototype. Now let's see how it works. Okay. So for that, in the similar manner, let me get the bean of this prototype bean class. Let's store the instance into a prototype bean with the instance variable name as prototype bean 1. So let me copy this three times. 1. So I have declared 1, 2, 3 for the prototype bean, right? Now let's run this, and now let's check how many times the constructor of this prototype bean class is getting executed. In the constructor we have written a prototype string. So you can see that for these a 3-time constructor is executed, and for singleton only 1-time constructor is executed. It means that whenever we are asking IOC container the bean of this prototype bean class, which is marked as an scope as prototype, so every time a new instance is created by the IOC container, and then it is providing us, right? Because 3 times the constructor is created, and we know that constructor executed when the new instance of the particular Java class is created. So how to prove this? So in the similar manner we can check the hash code, right? And we know that the every object has a different hash codes. So now let's check the hash code value of this all three instances. Let's change the name, save this. Now let me run this. Okay, so with this we will come to know what are the values of this hash code for prototype bean 1, prototype 2, and 3. So you will see the output. Then here you will see that every time we are getting a different hash code. It means, and we know that every instance, if it is unique, then there will be a unique hash code, right? So it means that when we are using a prototype scope, every time the Spring container is going to create a new instance for that particular bean, because these three has a different hash code, right? Yeah, so like hence proved, whenever you are going to use prototype, every time the Spring container is going to create a new instance, right? Now let's move and see that we have discussed and I told you that by default the scope of the bean will be singleton, right? So let's move to the singleton bean class. So here I have defined the scope, right? So let me comment it out. So still if I will get only one like SOP for this singleton class, then it means that by default container is using the scope as a singleton. Okay, so I have commented this. Now let's go and run this class. Now we will see how many times the constructor is getting executed, because here you can see that I have used 3 times the bean. Okay, I'm getting 3 times the singleton bean class. But again you will see, again only one time the constructor of the singleton bean class is executed. Okay, it means that by default the scope the container is using as a singleton, right? Yeah. Yeah, so thank you and have a nice day.